And thank you guys for being here. We know it's a beautiful day and there are a million good panels at every single time slot, so we feel very grateful for the folks in the room. And we really do want to make it a discussion. So, we have some wisdom, we have some experience up here, but we know that there's a lot of wisdom and experience in the audience. So please be thinking about your sort of questions, complications, pushback, and there's a microphone over there that we will turn to and just get as many voices in the room as we can. I'm really excited about this conversation for a couple of reasons. One is that in sort of my, I would say, 10, 15-year career of talking about gender issues and looking at activism, I think the success of the narrative around investing in girls has been one of the biggest successes. And many people pinpoint it to the Nike Foundation Girl Effect video was the first time that we sort of transcended preaching to the choir. I think a lot of us in this room probably do the kind of work where we often feel like we're in the room talking to people who already think like we do, and it can be hard to transcend and get new donors, new allies, new advocates. Actually, let's do a show of hands. How many of you work in some capacity with girls? Awesome. So I would say 3/4 of the room. So again, as I said, lots of wisdom in the room. We really hope that you will be sharing your thoughts at the mic towards the end here. So in any case, that has been so exciting for me to watch. I feel like, the kind of, like my uncle who used to say, "What the heck do you do for a living? I'm totally confused," was all of a sudden like, "Well, I've heard the ROI on investing in girls is pretty important." And it's sort of like, whoa, how did that happen, right? So I think for all of us, this has been a really interesting moment of watching a narrative like that take off and seeing what the implications might be. That's the second reason I'm really excited about this conversation is I think we've moved beyond our initial excitement, just pure excitement that this narrative existed and has transcended sort of beyond the choir. And now we're actually getting down to brass tacks and saying, what does it actually mean to invest in girls? In what ways is the narrative actually evolving to be a little bit limiting? Let's muddy this up, let's nuance it, right? So that's what we hope to do today, is have a conversation that adds some nuance to it, that doesn't just sort of give the angelic picture of what investing in girls means. I mean, the title is a little bit false because it says, beyond the hype, does it really pay to invest in girls? I think my first question to you is, does it really pay to invest in girls? Yes, right? None of us are going to tell you it does not pay to invest in girls. So if you're here for that, it's not going to happen. But we do all have a very nuanced take on what are the ways that investing in girls actually works, and who are these girls, and where is the money coming from, and how is the money being used, and how do we measure impact? So those are the kinds of things we're going to be talking about. First, I want to just introduce this incredible panel quickly, and I could take the rest of the time just reading their bios because they are some of the most interesting people that I've had the pleasure of sharing a stage with, but I'll just read short versions. Angela, who's right here in this beautiful green top, is director of the Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center and the Jean C. and James W. Crystal Professor in Adolescent Health and Professor of Pediatrics and Preventative Medicine. MSAHC, which is the acronym there, provides free comprehensive interdisciplinary health services to more than 11,000 vulnerable and disadvantaged youth annually, which, if you know this field, is actually fairly large scale, particularly domestically. Diaz is a former White House fellow and now chair of the board on children, youth, and families at the Institute of Medicine of the National Academies. She chaired the National Advisory Committee on Children and Terrorism and served on the NYC Commission on LGBTQ Runaway and Homeless Youth Task Force. I also happen to know, because my colleague Sarika Bansal, who's here moderating another panel at the same time, I think, did a beautiful story recently about Angela, and I learned so much about her personal life and sort of her journey and how that fits into this story as well. Because one of the things we do is we sit up here as experts, but we actually all, with the exception of poor Kennedy, were once adolescent girls. So, we all have something to say about the ways in which we were mentored or invested in as well, and I think you really add such an important piece in that. Catalina, right here to my left, feels like a long-lost friend. We've had lots of connections. Catalina Escobar is founder and president of the Juan Felipe Gomez Escobar Foundation, which she created in 2001 following a successful banking and business career. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos awarded her the National Merit Order Award in 2011. And in 2012, she was part of the Fortune U.S. State Department Global Women's Partnership and one of 10 CNN heroes. In 2013, Women's E! News named her one of 21 American leaders for the 21st century, and Revista Semana named her one of 10 best Colombian leaders. Escobar received Poder Magazine's Business Award and is an Ashoka Fellow. So kind of a slacker, as you can tell, right? It's too bad you haven't done anything. All right, so Rebecca, in the bright yellow shirt here, Rebecca Leventhal is a director on the business development team at Social Finance, a nonprofit dedicated to mobilizing investment capital to drive social change. Leventhal leads the development of criminal justice and youth development financings, including a current effort to reduce teen pregnancy in the District of Columbia. Previously, she worked for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and was an ambassador for President Clinton's political, charitable, and personal work. She also worked in the Office of Management and Budget and at the U.S. State Department, and she began her career in structured finance and municipal finance at Merrill Lynch. And we're so lucky to have Rebecca because she thinks in a very sophisticated way about impact, which I think is kind of the word on everyone's lips, right? Is like, how do we measure impact? How do we prove that investing in girls, now that we've got this narrative going and we've got some people really interested, how do we actually talk about the proof behind the rhetoric? And finally, our token male. And one of my favorite human beings, Kennedy Odede, is a co-founder, president, and CEO of Shining Hope for Communities. Formerly a street child living in Kenya's Kibera slum, he founded Shining Hope with savings from his $1 per day factory job. The organization now serves 70,000 beneficiaries with a model that links free schools for girls to holistic community services for all. Odede is an Echoing Green Fellow and member of the Clinton Global Initiative. He's a Forbes 30 Under 30 social entrepreneur, and his opinion pieces about urbanization and poverty have been published by the New York Times, CNN, and Project Syndicate. Kennedy is just an absolutely incredible human being. I've had the pleasure of getting to know him through the Aspen New Voices Fellows program, which if you all don't know about it, do not miss. Tonight at 5:30, there's an event called Undaunted, where a group of those fellows are going to be telling their stories, and they're fast and they're super surprising and visual, and it's going to be great. 5:30 at the Jerome Hotel. And I met Kennedy through this program, and what really struck me about Kennedy, in addition to that bio, which you just heard is so impressive, is he's the most beautiful writer. And if you haven't read his pieces, you should really check them out. He's just such a gorgeous writer, and I think you're working on a book, right? Is that a secret? I don't think it's a secret. He's working on a book, so follow Kennedy's work so that you can be one of the first people to get that book when it comes out, because I think it's going to be deeply important. Okay, so we're obviously in good hands here to have our initial conversation, and then we're going to turn to you all. But I want to start with this idea of sort of complicating the magic bullet nature of how people talk about this narrative of investing in girls. In what ways, for example, for you, Catalina, do you feel like the narrative is true, that investing in girls really does have a huge ROI? And in what cases have you seen it sometimes framed in a way that actually hurts your work? Too oversimplified.
Well, the impact is amazing. It's amazing. I work with extreme poverty girls that are pregnant in Colombia.
Yeah.
Colombia today is the #1 country in South America with the highest girls that have been pregnant. 19% of women who give birth are girls in Colombia. And I work in a region called Cartagena, where 30% of women who give birth are girls. So what we discovered was that what perpetuates poverty in our nations is teen pregnancy, especially the ones under the poverty line. Mm-hmm. So we developed this model where they get pregnant, unfortunately, for the first time, and we recruit the girls once they're pregnant for the first time, not the stage before, but because they're going to get pregnant anyways. Mm. They're repeating the same paradigms of their mothers and grandmothers. Mm-hmm. Actually, I've met grandmothers of 27 years of age.
Wow.
We just had a girl a couple of months ago of 11 years old, pregnant, 6 months, sexually abused. 40% of our girls are sexually abused. So it's a very big deal, but it's not on the priority of the national agenda. Mm-hmm. That's why we're really good at breaking the status quo. But basically what we do is, when girls are pregnant or poor, they drop out of school. And that is devastating. Girls should not drop out of school because they're out of development. So what we really do is make the intervention where we bring them back to the pyramid of development and develop this model, this beautiful model between 2 to 4 years. And we're not only impacting the girls, but once they're back on track, back studying, and then working, they're not only studying, mm-hmm. they're bringing GDP because they're working and they're earning income, mm-hmm. plus they're not having any more babies for the next 7 or 8 years upfront.
Right. So you're speaking to part of the success of the narrative is actually is real on the ground success, where investing in girls has an intersectional impact, right? It's economic, it's educational, it's mental health, it's physical health. It's sort of like extending in all of these different directions.
We're having a seed capital from the IDB, the Inter-American Developing Bank, and the Belgian government, because we need to replicate the model. It's a pandemic in Latin America, unfortunately. So right now we're going to start some studies, because we need to state, for $1 invested in this money, how much money our governments are going to be saving.
Right.
It's a health problem, number one. And number two, how much money are we giving or we're given input into the economy.
That's great.
That's the point where we are at this moment.
I want to skip to you on that, Rebecca, because you have some really interesting thoughts about this question of how do we measure impact and what are the metrics. What is the latest thinking on that when it comes to girls?
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting because Catalina's speaking from a Colombian context, but I really look at this from an American context, and it's actually a different story, but the same story. So young women who have teen pregnancies, their daughters are 3 times more likely to be teen mothers. Their sons are 2 times more likely to be incarcerated. Only 38% of them are graduating from high school. So you're seeing effects in the healthcare system, in the mental health system, in the criminal justice system. Those women will end up at the hospital with higher risk pregnancies, lower birth rate, et cetera. I look at this from a really specific lens around the idea of what does it cost to have negative outcomes for society, and what would it benefit us to have better outcomes. So I look at a very specific financing instrument called the Social Impact Bond, which we're developing in the United States, and as Courtney mentioned, we're pioneering the development of an instrument around teen pregnancy prevention in the District of Columbia. So the idea is you take an outcome like reducing teen pregnancy. That's not only a better social outcome, driving exactly the type of better social outcomes Catalina was describing, but it actually here in the US will drive better economics for all of us. When a young woman doesn't have a teen pregnancy, she doesn't spend as much money on Medicaid, she doesn't spend as much money on TANF or WIC. She doesn't spend as much money on special education services down the line for her young person, and she has a better earning potential, right? She has a high school diploma, she might get a secondary degree, so she's ultimately also going to be creating revenue for the government. Traditionally, a program like Catalina's or like Angela's couldn't actually capture that value they're creating. They might be able to go to foundations or to government and say, for every $1 you invest in me, you're going to get $10 or $15 in return. But a nonprofit doesn't actually get to sort of really make that argument. And we're trying to give service providers the ability to make that argument. If you have evidence that you actually create that impact, if it's been studied, we are going to the government and signing contracts that say, if we reduce teen pregnancy by at least X%, you'll pay us back. And we decide on an appropriate amount that teen pregnancy or whatever the metric should be reduced. We decide an evaluation methodology to decide whether or not you can assess if it has been achieved. Is it a randomized control trial? Is it a quasi-experimental design? And then we finance that contract with investment capital. So because we have the evidence to support the achievement of these outcomes, and we have really high quality service providers to deliver these outcomes, and government is willing to pay for these outcomes, we're actually able to recruit investors to pay upfront to deliver those outcomes. So in December of this past year, my firm placed a transaction around recidivism. So New York State offenders leaving the prison system, really high recidivism rate. We signed a contract with New York State that said, if we reduce recidivism by at least X%, you'll pay us back. The evidence was good enough that we were able to go to Bank of America Merrill Lynch and put the investment on their wealth management platform. And over 40 investors participated, so new money for the social sector. And the really exciting thing here is that government doesn't pay if it's not successful, because they're paying for outcomes, not output. So they're not paying to treat 40 young people, they're paying for a reduction of a certain percentage in an outcome. And so we bring a really specific lens around the monetizing of outcomes, and those outcomes are the type of outcomes that can be properly evaluated. And I know Courtney and I got into a little bit of interchange on email, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about how I think about impact or evaluation, but I'll pause there for the moment.
That's great, though. I think that's, and it's important because we're already hearing these different, if we sort of created the timeline of the adolescent girl, and that we need programs that are intervening at different moments. We have prevention. We have, as you said, if prevention wasn't possible and we have pregnant teens who have needs, then how do we reach them? I was also thinking about, so far we've kind of talked about girls in isolation a little bit. Sometimes the Invest in Girls narrative sounds like there's this individual girl and you like drop the investment in and then she's gonna perform in a particular way, but all of these girls are living in contexts, right? And they're living in racialized contexts, gendered contexts, economic contexts, and I feel like, Angela, your work is so rooted in addressing that whole context and that whole community. Could you talk a little bit about the ways in which we have to invest in girls, but we also have to see them as part of that community?
I would like to start by saying that one of the issues is that women and girls are seen as possession commodities. So we need to bring all the voices to the table to work towards equal rights and equality. Mm-hmm. So that's the context. The other thing is that I think we need to invest in early childhood development, in terms of nutrition, health, child care, social protection, because the investment that we do early really pay over the lifetime. In terms of girls, we have to give girls the knowledge, the skills, the services, the tools to make great decisions. And just to, we also need to start separating sexuality from reproduction, because people can have wonderful sexual beings and not reproduce. So we really need to make sure that we give young people the tools to enjoy who they are, evolve into these amazing human beings, enjoy their sexuality, and then we deal with the issue of reproduction. But talking about reproduction, that you heard about teen pregnancy, that is extremely important to give young people access to services, access to family planning, access to knowledge. And something that is going well in the US overall is that for the first time this past year, 2013, we had the lowest rate of teen births since the 1940s. Wow. When the National Center for Health Statistics started tracking down birth rates. So I think that is a tremendous, tremendous achievement. I'm considering it one of the biggest achievements.
That's really exciting.
And that is despite, and we can get into this in the conversation, despite very high level of young people having intercourse by 12th grade in the US students. 64% of the students are engaging in sexual activity. But the fact that we are trying to give them the knowledge, the access to comprehensive sexuality education, to the family planning, to more effective contraceptives, they are really making the good decision on how to protect themselves better. So I want to say that. And now I want to just talk briefly about the program that I run. It's called the Mount Sinai Adolescent Health Center. It's in New York City, and it is the Mount Sinai Health System response on how to best serve teenagers. So we have over 11,000 young people come to our doors every year asking for help. And we have tried to have a program without barriers. They come to us because we make it easy for them to come. We don't charge them, so everything is free. We don't exchange money at all. We give them all the supplies and the medication that they need. We buy for that. We pay for their transportation. These young people are really trying to do the right thing, so we feel that we need to help them and give them the tools to do that. And the model is not just about pregnancy. It's a really comprehensive model of physical health. We are their medical doctor, sexual and reproductive health, behavioral and mental health, dental, optical. That's the basic infrastructure, very interdisciplinary, and it's really an amazing program that has very little barriers. And we do much more that I'm going to stop now because I can take the entire hour, but I will be glad to continue later.
Well, I appreciate so much of what you said, and especially this point about sexuality and reproduction, because this is one of the things as I was have been watching this narrative, and as I was preparing for the panel, one of the pieces I was most influenced by is one I'm sure some of you have read, Kavita Ramdas's piece in the Stanford Social Innovation Review about kind of that the girl's narrative has turned the girl into kind of this ideal, perfect sort of container for our hopes, right? So when you see it going on, it's like a little girl. It's like the 8-year-old girl, the 9-year-old girl, the innocent girl. But as we all know, because again, we were all teenage girls except for Kennedy, it's not an innocent time. It's a complicated time. It's a messy time. It's a sexual time. It's an exploratory time. And so how do we create programs, to your point, that acknowledge all of that, that don't say you're only a deserving victim if you're somehow pure or perfect in our eyes as the adults who are administrating these services. So I think that's such an important point that you surface. The other narrative that's really, I think, on the rise right now, and Kennedy, this is where I want to turn to you, is actually about boys. Right? We hear a lot of conversation right now about boys and men, particularly in the US context, but I think all over. Kennedy has written beautifully about the need to create youth employment programs because a lot of violence is created when young people, especially young men, just don't have opportunities. And there's some worry that the boy narrative, that the male narrative is now competing with the investing in girls narrative, that really, and I think it comes from a psychology of deprivation, this thinking that there's only so many dollars, and if the sexy new thing is investing in boys, is that going to take away from girls? I hope it's and both, right? I hope we're investing in both girls and boys. But Kennedy, can you speak to that a little bit, your ideas about kind of what does it mean to invest in boys and the ways in which they support girls? You know, that these are not, we don't have to be separate, right?
That's good, yeah. Thank you so much. So
Yeah.
let me a little bit to go back why I'm into this movement, you know. When I was, my mother had me at the age of 15, you know, and we grew up in a big slum in Africa, Kibera. It was really hard life in poverty. I was the eldest kid, and I saw the struggle she was passing through. My stepdad gave up in this struggle, whereby men, in African culture, men pretend to be providers, whereby there's no job. So what happened? Women were suffering. So they're taking those anger on women. And yet my mom and other women in my community were going out to look for jobs, doing laundry, to try to educate their kids. And yet they were being beaten. And I was a good friend to my mother, you know. So and I remember at the age of 12, I became secretary for women group because they couldn't write. So I was hiding as a boy, helping them to write their merry-go-round with the money that they were investing. And another thing that happened, my sister, who was at the age of 15, was abused and became pregnant. It became a little bit what we call the circle of poverty. So that's how I got really much more involved into these issues, because of my mother. And at the same time, I realized that in Kibera, for example, we have to understand people on the grassroots level, what's happening, the culture, the economic situation. In my community, if you marry a daughter, they think it's better. So let's be honest. They're like, wow, that's the best they can give to the girl. But for the boy, they're going to go look for a job. I mean, so if you understand that everybody wants the best for their children, if we can understand that as the best way, that's be easy to tackle this issue. So what we did was that we had a school for girls in Kibera. So you have to know Kibera is really tough place where men are more powerful. But how to involve the men? So in St. Child, whereby we have a clinic, water, that serves the entire community, and they know that it's provided by the girls' school. In that way, men in the community are feeling part of this. So if you destroy the school, you're destroying the library, the water, and other social services. You know what I mean? And that's how we have been able to involve them. And then as you said about boys, we try to involve boys because really, it will be unsafe for women if we can't educate these boys to be allies, to be partners. You know what I mean? So I think, I believe in investment, but I also let's find ways on how to involve the entire community. Because there's a lot of anger. And this anger mostly, and so hard, it goes to women. You know what I mean? As we're fighting this disease, you know, and let's not lie, women are really suffering. In my community, look at my mom, my sisters, my neighbors, and they don't share the same cake. But we have to find a way how to involve these boys to understand that women have been really abused in the communities, and how can they become an ally on this? And in that way, we're going to make the world a better place for all.
Kennedy, tell me a little bit about what it's been like for you as a man doing this work among your peers. I mean, do you have guys, friends who come up to you and say, like, why are you working with girls? Like, what is the reaction from your peer group?
So what really happened for, I'm a little bit lucky on this. So at the age of 17, I founded a very big movement in a community whereby people were giving up, that is called Shining Up, to come and do theater, perform, and believing that we can change our own life by reading the book of Martin Luther King Jr. That's how I became really motivated. Like, wow, even though I'm poor, I can still do something. So people started calling me the mayor in my community. You know what I mean? So it became a huge movement, huge. So when I was starting to talk about girls' issues, first of all, in my community, I was like someone like a leader. So that's the advantage as a leader. But they thought like, you are stupid. What are you talking about, Kennedy? I mean, but you have to really start by being in the same level with them. Do you want your daughter to be abused? No man want that. Huh? Do you want your daughter to have a better life? Do you want them to trade their body at the age of 10 just for food? No. There is a way out. We have to educate the future leaders from this Kibera. And at the same time, we want to do it in a very good way. Do you have a clinic in Kibera? No. Do you have clean water? No. What are you going to provide then? We're going to have this school that then will provide those services. So during election, as Jen from Kenya knows that, during election, people take advantage of destroying things. But men in my community are coming out to protect the school because they know the school provides toilets, you know. So we have to find a way on how to involve these men.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I think there's both this strategic level that Kennedy's talking on, which is you basically tie services to the buy-in, whether authentic or not, in investing in girls, right? But also that I'm interested in you as a figurehead, right? As a symbol in your community of the fact that there are great men who care about girls and who are genuinely investing their time and energy into it. I want to introduce another idea, and this is something that's troubled me also as I've kind of watched this unfold, which is girls' voices, their voices themselves, talking about their own experiences, talking about these things on their own terms. Because I think one of the things that's happened is it's a lot of adults like us sitting on a stage talking about them, and even some very well-intentioned efforts that I've seen out in the world to get, to amplify girls' voices, as the terminology of the moment is. Often it seems like they're sort of stereotyping girls, that there's actually kind of a flattening out of girls' truly complicated, authentic voices. I mean, Angela, have you seen that in your work? How do you guys honor who girls really are rather than sort of talking about them and around them?
For one thing, we work with all genders. So girls, boys, and transgender youth. We have programs for them. And the way we work with them is that we talk with them very openly, very directly, so we get all information from them as to what's really going on in their lives. Not one girl is the same as the next one. So we get all information, we ask them about all the issues that we know young people may be dealing with, from being sad and depressed to being abused to, not having opportunities. And then, so they're our partners. We really work together. And then we use that to develop an intervention, working with them as partners that is really going to help them address and achieve whatever they want to achieve. Other more concretely ways are that we have an advisory board of young people. So whatever we do, from the design of the space to the services, it's about their input. It's a very, very team-centered place. It's not about us, it's about them. We are there to serve them. The other thing is that we have a program for peer health educators. So young people who want to help others, we train them for 80 hours during the summer, and we pay them because they're poor, and otherwise they will not come. So we pay them, and then once they are fully trained, we hire them to work, and we pay them, and they come after school, they work with other teenagers, they go to different schools in New York City, and we also walk the streets, because we don't only want to work with the over 11,000 that come to us asking for help, because some kids may not be together enough to find us. We go to the park, to the arcade, to the piers, where we know that young people are being exploited. And so we really very aware and attuned to the needs of young people, and we do satisfactory survey of young people. We ask them regularly, are we serving your needs? Is there anything that we need to change? What do you like? What don't you like? And that the program is always evolving to meet their needs, and it's totally about their voice.
Wow. And can you think of a moment when you were really surprised by what one of these adolescents said to you about what they needed or what was going on? Like a moment where you realized, like, wow, I never would have known that.
No, what I think I'm most surprised all the time is because we get so many kids every day that sometimes they have to wait. We don't want to turn anyone around, but they have, and for those kids to sit down there and wait and just then say thank you. They are so happy that we are helping them with whatever they have that they don't care to sit down and wait. That's one thing. The other thing is that when our program is an exclusive place in New York City, but we cater to poor kids without insurance that sometimes look very different than the neighborhood. So when we were moving there, the neighborhood was worried that this adolescent program was coming to their community, and I have to go to all type of meetings. And those kids, they come into the space. They are never. We are there in the new space since 1995. I had not gotten a single complaint that our kids are doing anything that is not acceptable. So I think sometimes we have poor expectation of these kids, and they're just amazing. And they are the most amazing healthcare consumers. But you have to serve them in a way that they understand and that they can use that information to make good decisions.
Wow. So Rebecca, when you're hearing this, from a measurement perspective, it sounds so customized. It sounds so like each intervention is so unique.
Yeah.
How do you study stuff like that?
Yeah.
How do you measure impact when it's like that?
Yeah, and I actually wanted to first respond to something that actually I saw in the themes of both what Kennedy and Angela said, because you're saying, how do you convince men to participate in, investing in girls, or how do you convince a nice neighborhood to allow, a program for adolescent teens? And I think one of the things that's so interesting about beneficial outcomes is there's actually really good interest alignment, and that's what we're capitalizing on. So you're saying, do men want to invest in girls? I actually see that as a relatively easy investment because we've been doing investing in sort of quote unquote hardened felons, which are like the least appealing people to invest in. And yet we found that people wanted to invest in them because they started to understand that their success was tied to their own success. The idea that if our formerly incarcerated individuals are doing better is not only increasing public safety, it's reducing our tax burden. And that's interesting to you no matter sort of what your politics are or your feeling about the criminal justice system. And I think your point around investing in young women, it's beneficial to the young men and the fathers and the brothers, et cetera. On the measurement point, there are two really interesting things here. I think about measurement in two ways. One is evaluation, and I don't know how familiar people are with the idea of evaluating social programs, but there's been amazing growth in how we evaluate social programs, and now the gold standard is called a randomized control trial, which is similar to how we evaluate drugs. Are they effective? We give half the people the placebo or not the medicine. We give half the people the treatment, and we see what the effect looks like. And that really gives an incredible amount of rigor to understanding how good social programs work. So that's evaluation. Is Angela in fact having the effect we want her to have? But the other piece, and Angela is really speaking about it, is what are the components that get us there? And if you're going to replicate good social programs, you have to understand the steps. Is it a certain amount of visits? Is it a certain type of visits? Is it your first person has to come in at X number of age if you're going to have that impact? And that type of data collection that now social programs have allow us to actively problem solve and customize. Angela might learn that there's a certain dosage that needs to happen in order to have an effect, or somebody needs to use 3 of the 4 types of services in order to have a meaningful impact. And those things working together are really critical. The point there, though, is that it is customized. You're not going to have the same type of measurement and evaluation for an adolescent health program as you would for a job training program.
Right.
And that's the type of thing where we really need philanthropy to take the risk to invest in understanding that and providing social programs the opportunity to study and learn and invest in really good data collection systems and really good training for people to actually do the data collection. But that sounds like exactly the type of thing one would need to do to understand not just are we having an effect, but why are we having an effect and how can we improve along the course.
Great, thank you so much. And Catalina, I want to turn to you. I want to engage this question about not just us investing in girls, but girls investing in themselves. Because part of what your program is about is helping girls see a different future for themselves, a different possible future, right?
Yes, because they're not victims anymore. They don't see themselves as victims. They're part of a progressive society. Once you do the intervention, actually our facility is a green building. They don't have such a thing. They don't have, they live on top of garbage. Colombia, 10% of our population is in extreme poverty conditions. In Cartagena, 68% of our population there is under the poverty line. I mean, we're talking about people who, the best way I can explain this is like our girls live like on a fish tank. So all they see, all they learn is what they see in the fish tank. So they've been sexually abused, they, suffer from hunger or disease, and they become pregnant. Actually, the problem is not getting pregnant. It's part of it. It's just part of whatever they have over there. But once we bring them out of that fish tank, they realize that there's a whole world of opportunities out there waiting for them. And it's not only giving them the basics, not only providing them with proper health care or nutrition, because that's the easy part. It's how are you gonna make the social transformation? How are you going to empower these girls so they make the step and say, I'm gonna go back home, because they come to our facility on a daily basis. It's not a shelter. So once they go back to their communities, they say, listen, I don't belong there. Actually, I'm better than that. And I'm a good human being. So we provide them with excellence. Because there's a thing, why nonprofits in the world who work with the poor think poorly? Poor thoughts, poor volunteers, poor money, poor everything. You're not making any social transformation. But instead, if you input the best money, the best interventions, the best infrastructure, now you're giving them the real hope. And you're telling them, we respect you. And they're tired of being poor, don't you think so? I mean, the poor are tired of being poor. Oh God, it's so tiring. And the only way to develop a good model is not imposing. It's bottom up, it's understanding, it's going there. I attend labors from sexually abused girls. I had 3 children. So I pretty much understand what she's going through. So the best way is, it's not telling them, I'm so sorry, and you're gonna be a victim for the rest of your life. No, that's not the way. It's giving them the best we can have so they can move forward, and it's boom, like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. So microphone is here. I hope you're thinking about questions, pushback, complicated even more. These panelists have so much to offer and we don't have a lot of time. I wanted to bring up one thing because it's so in the news, and it feels like we can't not have a bit of this conversation, which is about international security, right? We think about, girls, investing in girls as we've been talking about a health issue, an aspirational issue, but in fact, it's deeply about safety, the most basic safety. We're talking about gender-based violence, and I'm thinking about, of course, in Nigeria, the 300 girls who have been kidnapped and by Boko Haram, and I was just actually reading that there was a $6 billion campaign by the national government in Nigeria to get Boko Haram that failed, right? $6 billion. This was prior to the kidnappings. So we're not just talking about individual nonprofit programs, we're talking about national security issues. We're talking about governments that are absolutely failing their citizens. And then the other element of this particular issue that is so hot in the news is there was a great outcry, particularly in America, but all over the world, about this issue, and yet, where's the accountability, right? What's happened? Anyone want to speak to that? I mean, the power of the internet and the power of these kind of narratives is evident because it is building awareness and it's exciting, but what happens when the hashtag is no longer hot? I mean, these girls are still missing, and if the news cycle keeps moving, are we all going to forget about them? I mean, is anyone going to hold the Nigerian government accountable or whoever else, the Boko Haram accountable, for God's sake? So I mean, what are your thoughts about that? Anyone want to weigh in on that before we turn to the audience?
Well, you know something, Colombia, I mean, we're a very violent country. We've been having, for the past 58 years, a war with guerrilla and, of course, drugs. So when the Boko Haram came with that and the Bring Back Our Girls, I came out with a column because in Colombia, last year we had 1,000 girls from the guerrilla who were sexually enslaved, and they went through illegal abortion. So it's a very big deal. And another fact, Colombia right now, only 5% of women who are raped or sexually abused report the cases. Today, the #1 country in the world with the greatest rape cases is the Congo. Every 10 minutes, a woman gets raped. In Colombia, every 14 minutes, a boy or a girl is raped. And the cases that are reported, last year were 19,000 cases reported, and it's only 5%. 19,000 cases were reported, and our general prosecutor only prosecuted 3.2% of the cases. Right now, we're leading a very big cause about impunity. Because I'm going to tell you the truth. Colombia right now, we're growing 5% GDP. And we're negotiating whatever in Cuba with the guerrilla and a peace treaty. I don't really, to be sincere, our peace starts right here with the girls.
Right. And to your
And they're not, and our nation, our president, actually, you know, he offered me a job twice, and I said no because they want to keep our mouth shut, and I cannot do that.
right. Right.
Because I'm the voice of these girls.
Yeah.
They will never have a chance to get a process in the prosecutor's office.
Right.
So for me to really impact our community and our country, the real social, the key social transformation are the girls, period.
Yeah.
And their voices and their rights. It's just a basic mathematics.
And also, to your point, capturing that outrage, not just at one moment when all of a sudden the hashtag is hot and people realize there's 300 girls who got kidnapped, but that all year long, all of us are witnessing this happening on micro levels that add up to 300 girls plus, right? So let's turn to the audience. We'd love to hear from you. And I just want to say there's, again, so much wisdom in the room. Please honor all of that wisdom by keeping your comments pretty succinct, right? So questions, comments, pushback, whatever, but keep it succinct so we can hear as many voices as possible. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just a very quick comment and then a question. I just think that we've really let those girls down in Nigeria. I think we have this idea in the West that if we throw up a piece of paper with a hashtag, we've really done something. And it's actually pretty offensive. I'm from Canada, and a couple of our journalists have just been thrown in prison for 7 years. And we've got all these media folks holding up these things that say free AG journalists. Well, what good does it do if people go on to the next cause? Like, what do we need to do to keep that going? And I guess in that same vein, what advice, just simple advice for average people, forget governments or what have you, but men, women in communities, what advice would you give them on how they can help empower the girls and the women in their community? What tangible steps can we take in that regard?
Kennedy, do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, okay, I have a different view on that. I think let's be realistic here. I think the hashtag, for me, somehow reminded me of how the world is becoming a global village. That what's happening in Nigeria is affecting somebody in America. You know what I mean? And it took a lot of time before the government reacted, let's not lie, until the hashtag. You know what I mean? And it has created a place whereby there's now talk going on. Security issues in Nigeria, they're working on it, on girls' schools, you know what I mean? So I think it really brought something, you know, and it brought that kind of attention, which was good, which the government was not really being serious, you know, and now there are some measures they're working on. But I also believe that there's something that's gone down, you know what I mean? And the only solution on security when it's come to our sisters in developing countries is how to tie everything to the entire community. It's so sad to say this. When I remember growing up as a little boy, women's right was tied to Western culture. Not true. You know what I mean? So can we change the narrative? Can we make people in the local communities, on the grassroots, to start thinking on how to educate their own women, on how to bite on their own culture? And if you don't do that, we are bringing a lot of tension. And even right now, there's a lot of money put on girls' education. What about boys? That's a good question. If we end up having these boys who are gonna be terrorists, bad husbands, there is no future. You know what I mean?
I love that terrorists and bad husbands
No.
go together.
No,
That
exactly.
works for me. I like
So
that.
we have to ensure that the community thrives as a whole. And that's why whenever I really wanted to do something for women, that's why the idea of having a school for girls and making the entire community buy into that is very, very important. So we have to find ways on how to make men be part of this.
Thank
So
you.
we can have security.
Angela, I know you wanted to speak to that briefly.
I think it's not just about developing countries. So, we need to recognize that there is a lot of violence. And violence, and I do work in New York City, but I also have work in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And something that starts very early is childhood sexual abuse. For example, this is happening in the homes. This is happening by the family members. This is happening, in the US, about 25% of women and 1 of every 6 men has been sexually abused. So we as a community, as a society, we need to have the awareness. And for example, when we hear about sex trafficking in the US, we think about other countries. Well, we have tons of children being sex trafficked right here in the US, every single state, and the District of Colombia. And also there is a connection between being sexually abused as a child and being sex trafficked. Mm-hmm. So we just need to understand the value of children, young people, and women, and stand for that, not when something happens, a crisis, but steadily, and do not give up. We just need to have the awareness and then stay invested in this type of issues.
Amen. All right.
Thank you so much, first of all. So I'm a social worker in New York City, and we're seeing a lot in clinics, both freestanding and in school-based clinics, that a lot of the clinical staff are counseling young women on most effective to least effective counseling, or contraceptive rather. And part of that is the use of long-acting reversible contraception, or LARCs, such as the IUD. And I wonder what your thoughts are about that.
You want to take that? Is that anything that you've ever looked at impact on, Rebecca?
I have not.
Anybody else work with that?
The way that we work at, that has been the movement of the last number of years. But the way that we work at our center is that we speak with the young people about the full range of contraception that is approved by the FDA. And then we help them think through what method are they more likely to be successful as using, depending on their lifestyle, depending on whether they need confidentiality or not, depending on what our plans are. And we do the IUDs, we do the implant, we do use those methods. And we actually have become a referral center in New York City for people that work with teenagers but do not have that skill set. So certainly, if the young person is willing and interested in those methods, I think they are great methods. But we need to really not forget that they have personal liberties and that they have the right to decide what method they would like to use.
In our experience, and just to let you know, in order to have a very successful model, we need to have two things. First, our girls need to earn a decent and stable income later on after they study. And number two, they cannot have babies for the next 7 or 8 years, because there's evidence that says that when a girl gets pregnant for the first time and she's poor, her chances to become socially productive later in life, it's very less. But if she becomes pregnant for the second time, her chances are 0. So we work with the girls, but not with the IUD, because they're underage. And we have to be very, very responsible. So we basically work with implants and shots. But not pills. They forget getting the pills. So So those are the two types of methods.
Go ahead, Angela.
I just want to say that there's a continuum. We need to work on prevention, and we do that. We need to work with the young people when they get pregnant and make sure that they have the options that are available. But we also have a teen parenting program, because when they have children, you also want to make sure that those children have the best possible outcome, and the teenagers still have their own needs. That teenager still has needs. We want them to stay in school. We need to prevent the next pregnancy, and then we need the child to really have the best possible parents that they can. So it's a dual way of working, and it's not giving them mixed messages. We're very clear.
Yeah.
It's in your best interest to prevent the pregnancy. When you are pregnant, we're here for you. We will help you, and everything is free. But if you have a child, you also know we love you, we respect you, you have the right to get your needs met and that child. Also to prevent the intergenerational cycle of, teen parenting and
really
poverty.
I must add.
I want to
I'm
make
sorry.
sure we hear enough voices. You want to weigh in
No,
briefly?
I just want to add something else. And one thing is the method, but the other one is promiscuity. So we need to be very clear that the message is the method is good as long as you don't have sex with everybody. So, because we're talking about base of pyramid here.
Well, that's a complicated one. That's a complicated can of
It's
worms
very-
we just
yeah,
opened.
it's very, very
I did want to share one. I'm thinking about this great guy who started us out and asked for really practical things that you can do. This is something my mom did. This is the school of Jerry Martin. She was a social worker, and she decided she was going to take a big brown paper bag, fill it with condoms, put it in the hallway closet. Keep in mind, I grew up in Colorado Springs, one of the most conservative cities in the nation. Put it in the hallway closet and say, I use these for my work because I do work with young people, but they happen to be there, and I don't really count them. So guess what? My home prevented many, many, many pregnancies and STIs over the years because people knew there's this one weird closet with a brown paper bag in it where you can get contraceptives. And I mean it. It really made a difference in my friends and my life. So that doesn't have to be your intervention. That was the school of Jerry Martin. But I think there are small things like that you can actually do that could save lives. I mean, you don't know what the impact of those things could be. Yes.
Thanks, Courtney. I think that ties into what I actually wanted to ask,
great.
especially for Kennedy and Kata.
Kata is shorter.
I love Kata, and thank you so much. So my question is twofold. One is the quick one on contraception, for example. I come from Uganda. The challenge that we are having, we have development actors who are actually taking us backwards. We have NGOs that are very conservative, coming from the West, and they are saying we shouldn't use contraception, tied up with our politics. Of course, you all know about Uganda. So how do you then undo that? In schools that are private, by the way, it's going to go into my second question, private Christian-founded schools where the kids are not allowed to have access to contraception, yet we have proof that 11-year-olds, 9-year-olds are having sex. How do you undo that? The second question ties into education. How come we don't no longer talk about education as a human right? Access to quality education as a human right. The issue of Boko Haram is actually, it says condemn Western education. When you read the articles that I've read, they all point to the fact that those young men have not been able to be integrated in the modern education system. Therefore, they see it as something that has taken away their other family members, friends who have gotten access to education, access to more income, access to opportunity. They are being left behind.
Yeah.
When do we ever talk about that in this context?
Thank you. So in the service of our 3 more questions, I'm going to say I think you spoke the education piece beautifully, and I think everyone in this room would say we believe in this idea of education as a human right, and how do we keep having that conversation. I think the first one is one I'd love to hear the panel address about funding, religious ideas that get attached to that funding. I mean, Kennedy, is that something you're coming up against at all?
Oh, that's something you raise is very interesting, because right now in Kenya, the parliament is trying to revoke, because there's a lot of lobbyists from the West who are really saying no contraceptives, and it's also the time with the church, So it's a very big issue. But the same thing that I still believe in, for example, in Kibera, we work with the parents group, women mostly, and just have them talk about themselves, with their own leaders in the communities. And everybody, I believe that, want the best. If you give them your mind, for their children and for themselves. And then let people have this called hard talk, about these issues. Because what's happening now, they find themselves in this struggle they don't understand. Brought up through this Bible thing they're using, all these kind of things happen, you know. So we've been able to educate people. Education is so powerful, you know what I mean? Letting people know what it means, you know what I mean? And nobody wants to have many kids like that, you know what I mean? People want to protect themselves. So we do that by having grassroots education.
Yeah, this came up on our women's health panel earlier, and Jane Otai, who's here in the middle, was talking about how she even uses Bible verses with religious leaders. She finds Bible verses that speak to the importance of spacing out children and some of these, what we think of as more progressive values, and ends up having these conversations where the person is at, right, on that religious level. So if you need the Bible verses, there's Jane. She can help out with that strategy. I think probably both of you, Angelina and Kata, are working in a Catholic context sometimes. Do you feel this is coming up around Catholicism for your funding, or this isn't a problem?
Really. Well,
Okay.
even though Colombia is a Catholic country, we found that the base of the pyramid, they're not even values. I mean, most of the people are Christians, but it's not a context of religion, to be sincere. No.
But
no.
the funding isn't tied to any particular, and neither for you, Andrew.
No,
Okay.
we actually
really.
get funding from a diverse number of people, and
Yes, of
the
course.
young people that come to us are from all type of background, from Orthodox Jewish girls to Muslims
Wow.
to all type of religion.
Amazing.
And they come and we serve them.
Okay, great. Let's hear some more
Thank you
voices.
very much. My name is UT and I'm Nigerian, and I'm probably the only Nigerian in the room. And I think I should weigh in on the Boko Haram issue.
Yes, please.
Now, we've talked so much about Boko Haram and everybody makes a lot of good noise about it. But the fact is that people don't seem to know what is the underlying reason why the Boko Haram issue is even existent. And if we don't treat that, we will never get anywhere. Now, beyond Boko Haram, something else will come. I can make that prediction because I know Nigeria is going to take a long time to get through this. The reason is this: the oil. The oil is not getting to everybody. It's not getting to most people. And at the point, people get frustrated. Now, Boko Haram is in a region where oil has been found. And those folks, I think, are beginning to fight as much as they can to get some control of it before the government really gets a hand on it. The point here is this: Nigeria is one of those countries in the world where people don't vote. Don't think about anything you see on the media. It's all show. Truth on the ground: I am Nigerian. I have lived in Nigeria, and I voted only once. I mentioned it to my African friends yesterday. The reason is it's too unsafe to vote. And now it's not Nigeria. Nigeria is not the only country where that happens. We're not the only people that have corruption and political issues, and rigging. Question is, how do you make lasting change, true significant change, in a society where people don't vote? They have no choice. They have no voice.
Okay, that's...
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the democratic rights linked to the economic rights. Thank you. So we're out of time, but I don't want to miss the questions you would have asked or the comments you would have made. So will you two briefly come to the mic and say what you'd say, and then we'll wrap up here?
My name is George Bowani from Sierra Leone. I run a husband school and a Pamama program for couples. Looking at the concept we're deliberating on here with regards to girls, in as much as this is holistic, I want to very much toe on the line with my brother here for us to look at it in the context of our culture. We have looked at many failed programs that had gone into my country, Sierra Leone specifically, in terms of empowering women. For example, just after the war, we had emergence of a lot of human rights groups looking at empowerment of women, and we had this great idea of microcredit, going in and giving women finances and whatever. And the truth of it is, within the shortest possible time, that one collapsed. It collapsed completely because the men were excluded out of it. And now the woman has the capital. The child comes, daddy, school, go to your mother. Daddy, I'm not feeling well, go to your mother. And sometimes the men too come, hey, can you lend me some money from what you have? And before you think of it, it collapses. In the culture where we come from, the women, in as much as we believe in the generality, the universality and indivisibility of human rights, you go back to the home, the women are subject to their husbands. As an advocate in my country, we have found it very frustrating prosecuting gender-based violence issues. When it comes to the aspect of litigation, a lot of the women shy off from going to court and giving witness against their husbands.
That happens.
And so it falls back on their faces. So you see, I mean, these are issues that we are talking of. So I really want to toe the line here to get a successful investment to see girls come to that level, we have to target men and boys.
Yes. Thank
In
you.
our program,
we're running out of time. So
yes, I know.
to-
Just one
Okay.
second. We have to target men and boys because these are the decision makers, and until we are able to bring them within that four, wherein they are equally able to see the reasons why they have to give the space for women to equally exercise their right, it will always be a fallback. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Mary, can you be very brief?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you, wonderful panel. I'm Mary from Tanzania, and I was just wondering whether Angela or any one of you could really share on where you have seen in a country or a context where, like in my country, where having sex is still considered a taboo. You should not have sex until you're married. Speaking about sex and sexuality with your parents is a taboo. It's only recent that our health education is looking into integrating in our health system, the sexuality topics. So I'm just wondering where, now that you have programs that are working, we're so far from even having youth-friendly clinics. Where do the youth get this information? You're pregnant, you're just out of school, and you're on your own, and it's a shame to the whole family. So in countries where the culture issue is still a big thing, and we don't have services like the ones that you're pioneering and saving so many girls, how and where have you seen it work? I'm just wondering, where do we start from, where the culture is?
So because I'm really going to get in trouble, I'm going to say, Angela and Mary, can you guys hook up over here? And anyone who's interested in that question, which is a fantastic question, to come have a small group chat over here. But I want to leave you with one thought, which is, again, most of us were adolescent girls at one point in this room. And my guess is if you're in this room, someone invested in you in a really big way. So your call to action is, sometime today, and literally today, don't go to bed without having done it. Write, email, text, whatever you can do, call someone who invested in you and thank them and tell them you were part of a conversation today that reminded you that you are partly where you are because of that person, and that will make a great difference, okay? So thank you so much to our panelists. You guys are awesome.